I've spent the last few months testing, frankly, a lot of different sleep and activity trackers. But the two big brands I was most interested in comparing were the Whoop versus the Oura Ring. So that's exactly what we're gonna do in today's video. And I'm gonna tell you something big right up front. There will be a best choice for you personally, so by the end of this video, my goal is to help make it clear to you which one that is. Whether it's the Oura Ring, the Whoop strap, or neither. Let's start with a general overview of the Whoop versus Oura Ring features. So, the Whoop is usually worn on the wrist or bicep, although it can also be worn in the underwear if you buy a special thing for that. Hashtag panty tracker. And the Oura Ring is obviously worn on your finger. Hopefully this wouldn't fit on anything inside your underwear, but we don't shame here. Both devices measure mostly the same things, which is why I don't think it makes sense to own both. If you do decide to buy either of these, I'll include some links down below, which I'll try to keep updated with the best current promotions available. Basically what they're doing is regularly measuring biometrics such as your heart rate variability, blood oxygen, skin temperature, sleep activity, and more. Then they crunch all this data from day to day, week to week, to form a baseline understanding of your own unique physiology and give you an overall rating for how you're doing on any given day. Whoop calls this your recovery score, while Oura calls this your readiness score. Same, but different. So at a glance, you can use Whoop's recovery score or Oura's readiness score to get a feel for how rested and optimally prepared you are to take on the day's challenges. A lower recovery or readiness score could suggest that you should take it easier today, while a higher score might encourage you to push yourself a bit. And both these devices are pretty damn good at coming up with these scores. That's what makes them the most valuable in my opinion. Oftentimes they know when something's up before even you do. For example, maybe you go out raging with your friends one night, having too much alcohol and not getting enough sleep. Well, that'll cause your HRV and sleep score to take a dive, which in turn will give you a lower recovery or readiness score the next day. And the same thing can happen when your body is fighting off a cold, stressed out, or when you just worked too hard the day before. Over time, either device can help you learn which lifestyle choices have the biggest impact, positive or negative, on your overall health and well-being. But let's back up just a minute, because there are actually two other features that Whoop and Oura share that are actually factored into those scores, and these are your sleep and activity metrics. When it comes to sleep, both devices do a pretty solid job of tracking your sleep, measuring how much time you spent in bed, how consistent you were in keeping a regular sleep schedule, and how much time you spent in the various phases of sleep, like deep sleep and REM. Now I will say, after watching my data on both apps over the past month, Whoop does seem to underreport my sleep by about half an hour or so on average compared to the Oura Ring. The general consensus from the internet is that the Oura Ring is the more accurate sleep tracker, although Whoop does have the ability to function as a vibrating alarm clock that activates when it detects that you've slept the optimal amount, so when you're well rested. Not just a time, but like a physical state, which I think is a feature that buys it some points for me. Nonetheless, on sleep, Oura takes the win by a small margin. Now let's pop over to the activity tracking section of each app. Oura keeps it simple and calls this activity, while Whoop gets fancy and calculates a strain score based on your cardiovascular stress for the day. Now as an activity tracker, I gotta say, both Oura and Whoop have some pretty major limitations. First off, let's be clear. Calorie tracking is pretty much never particularly accurate with any fitness or activity wearables, like across the board. There are just too many variables at play for any device to measure this accurately. So let's not even bother with that metric and just focus on Oura's activity metric and Whoop's version of this, the strain metric. Now, a big part of Oura's activity tracking is counting your steps and tracking your movement patterns, whereas Whoop doesn't count steps at all, but instead calculates strain via your cardiovascular activity. And this is also not a perfect metric because this makes it a bit biased to grant higher strain levels to someone running a marathon, for example, versus a power lifter lifting heavy weights for low reps. If your heart is working hard for a longer period of time throughout the day, that's what's going to really accumulate the strain. Overall, I think Oura and Whoop both do an okay enough job as activity trackers for the average user to get a relative sense of how they're doing from day to day, and I think the metric is good enough to be used as a factor for your readiness or recovery scores, but neither one is going to be perfectly accurate. However, between Oura versus Whoop, I am going to give Whoop the win here as the better activity tracker, and that's mostly because I think Whoop is way more versatile for a larger range of exercises. If your primary form of exercise is walking or running, Oura could work great for that. But if you're lifting weights or using your hands in pretty much any way, including doing yard work or manual labor, you're just going to wind up losing so much activity data by having to take the ring off to avoid damage to the ring, or even worse, injury. Decision time. Should you go with Whoop or Oura? Well, like I said, they both track sleep pretty well, with the Oura Ring being slightly more accurate, and they're both okay enough at activity tracking, with Whoop being a little bit more versatile there. So I think they're both high quality products in terms of the data, metrics, and insights they provide. So really, the first and biggest question you need to ask yourself is which one do you see yourself wearing more often? Because the one that's going to provide the most value to you is the one that spends the most time on your body. If activity tracking is important to you, but you're mostly lifting weights in the gym, Oura might not be the best fit. But if you spend most of the day in a professional setting where the Whoop band might look strange, Whoop might not be the best fit. Comfort is also something to consider here, but that's super dependent on the individual. I tend to find the Whoop band more comfortable because I don't usually wear a ring, and it kind of feels strange to me to have a ring on, but there are many people who disagree with me on that. So ask yourself, would you feel more comfortable wearing a ring to bed every night or a wristband? Everyone's different, but these are two of the most comfortable options out there. The other major decision factor at play for most people is going to be the pricing. The Whoop device itself costs nothing up front, but you'll be stuck paying anywhere from like $17 to $30 a month to access your data. Oura, on the other hand, will cost anywhere from $300 to $450 upfront for the ring, then $6 a month for a subscription. Now, something else you might want to consider is the fact that over the course of, say, 3 years or so, Whoop will probably wind up costing you considerably more money after those subscription fees add up, depending on what structure you go with, unless, of course, you lose or break your Oura Ring, which is always a possibility. I consider myself a pretty responsible person, and I almost lost my Oura Ring within the first few days by taking it off to eat at an Ethiopian restaurant, and that was a really unpleasant surprise when it wasn't in my pocket. So that's something that could be a factor, since Whoop is a lot harder to lose, and even if you did lose it, you could always get a replacement for just $75. Alternatively, the cheapest loophole would technically be to get the Whoop for like 1 year, use it religiously to figure out all the little habits that hurt or help your sleep and recovery, and then just cancel at the end of the year if you feel like you learned everything you needed to about your body and you didn't want to pay anymore. And this might be a good time to remind you that I've got some affiliate links down below that I'll keep updated with the best deal possible for first-time users. But most importantly, before you buy, guys, just remember that if you're not going to use these tools to make meaningful changes in your life, you probably shouldn't waste your time or money on either. Just being real here. If you don't really mind subscription models, and you're looking for a comfortable way to very accurately track sleep and recovery and somewhat decently track activity, either the Whoop or Oura Ring could be good options. Just keep in mind what they cost, what kinds of exercises you usually do, and which one would fit more seamlessly into your current lifestyle so you could be wearing it as often as possible. For those of you who think you know which one you're more interested in, but you aren't 100% sure yet, check out my full Oura Ring review or Whoop review for a deeper dive into either. Otherwise, let us know down in the comments which one you like better, or if you think they both suck and like something different altogether.